Hi, I'm Jonathan Steele. In this video, we're going to look at the internationalized routing functionality recently added to Next.js 10. We will build static, localized product pages using their pre-existing data fetching APIs, as well as a GraphCMS content API. So let's dive straight in. So Next.js 10, which was a very recent release the past few weeks, Vercel added support for internationalized routing. Now what that essentially means is that they have out of the box provided a way to build pages from your pages directory for each locale specified in the configuration. Now this will work with pre-existing Next APIs such as their router, such as the NextLink component, and as well as their data fetching APIs, GetStaticProps and GetStaticPaths, both which we'll use in this video. Now, before we go any further with Next.js, we're just going to quickly dive into a GraphCMS project. This has localization set up. This is something I've set up prior to this video. And we're going to quickly just run through the schema, look at the settings to see how everything is configured and how localization actually works with your content API. So looking at the schema here for this project, and in particular looking at a product model, which is what we're going to be interacting with throughout this video. And you'll notice that on each of these fields there is these localized tags there to indicate that these fields are localized. And this is controlled, this can be controlled here when editing or adding new fields to your models. Now, what that gives us is when we're actually editing a content item, is that we actually get multiple inputs for each field. So you can see here, we have localizations enabled for this particular product for both English and German. And it gives us a name field in both English and German. We also have a slug field for English and German, and description for English and German. Those are all strings. I believe this is a markdown field, so we can actually parse the markdown in the front end as we need. And also we've got a price, which can also be localized. So right now this is a integer, and you may have different prices in regions depending on what you're offering. If you were using GraphCMS as your PIM, you could essentially offer different product pricing per region or per localization. Now that's a quick overview of the schema editing and the content editing for localizations. But how do we actually set up a localization inside of a project? So on the settings here on the left hand side, we've got this locale section, and this is as simple as it is. We have a pre-configured list here of a whole range of countries and localizations that you might want to add. We can quickly filter through these. I'm just going to go ahead and add Spanish to my project. Click add there. The schema will be regenerated now to add that localization in. And if we go back to our content, you can see now that we actually have an additional localization available to us, Spanish. And what we would do is, if we wanted to add a Spanish localized version of this product, we can click that, and then we get these additional fields available to us to edit. Now I'm not going to go ahead and do that because my Spanish is terrible. So we're just going to work with English and German in today's video. Now that's what it looks like from the actual content editing aspect. So what does it look like when I want to query for a certain localized product or a variety of localized products? Now you can see we have a basic query here, which is essentially fetching all of our products or querying GraphCMS for all of the products available in our project. So we're asking for the ID, name, slug, and locale field. But what's particularly interesting to note here is the locales field argument or the query argument. Now this here expects an array what we can do is we can actually pass in the keys of the locales that we want. So we got the autocomplete here from the schema, from our project schema, the actual localizations that are available to us. And what happens is when I pass in one of these keys, that will act as the primary key on the query. So in this particular case, we want to use DE, German products. We want those to be returned. So I'll just run this query. And as you can see there, we have our German products returned. Now I can provide a fallback, and what that means is if there is no German localization available for a product, then it will fall back to the next key in the array. So if we run this query again, you'll see we have German products returned because there is a German localization available for each product. Now if I was to switch this to ES for Spanish, now we've added that to our project, but we didn't actually add any Spanish localized products. So if I run this query now, what we should expect to see is actually the English products returned on the right hand side here. And that is the case. So that's a quick look at how you would query that. There's obviously a lot more available in localization with GraphCMS. I will point you to our documentation here. This is actually new documentation that I've just pushed live. Some great work by my friend and colleague Jamie Barton on this. But yeah, this is definitely worth looking at here if you want to get familiar with localization and how to use it with your GraphCMS project. But for now, what we'll do is we will just quickly look into how we will get this data into Next.js into localized routes and pages. So diving back into the Next.js documentation, we have this getting started section here, and what we're actually going to add is to our project is a nextconfig.js file. So I'm inside of a pre-configured Next.js project, one that I made earlier. Nothing crazy here, just set up with a GraphQL request client to make requests to GraphCMS, a basic page, and I've also added Tailwind styling just so it looks a little bit more presentable. So we'll just add a next config file. Now what we need to add in here is actually this i18n key. Now it's a hash and it expects certain keys, and the ones that we are particularly interested in is this locale key here. These are the locales that we want Next.js to build pages for and to support. And we also need to provide a default locale. So what that is the root page will actually default to this locale rather than the others. So we'll just add this here. And we're going to add locales. Now it's important to note here that these locales, this locales array should map directly to the values that we've added to GraphCMS. So in that case, this is EN and DE. If we were supporting ES, obviously we could add that in there, but we haven't built any localized Spanish products yet, so we'll just omit that for now. And we need to add a default locale, and we want this to be English. So you'll see here the default locale is what's actually used when you're visiting a non-prefixed path. So if we were going to the root of our Next.js application, the root page, this would be English. The locale, or the default locale, and the current locale would be English. Oh, done that again. Always showing OBS off. So we'll go ahead and save that. And what we need to do is, yeah, you can see Next is giving us a warning there, just telling us that we need to restart our build to actually see the changes to our config. So we'll go ahead and do that now. So what we're expecting to see now is not much different, but except that we will have our root page, which will be in English, and we will have a new path, a /de path available to us, which will have a different locale key. However, the page will look identical. And the reason that is because we're simply returning a string here. We're not actually doing anything with that locale key. We're not using a local I18N library such as React I18N, and we certainly haven't queried GraphCMS for that localized content yet. So if we go here, we can see hello world there. And again, hello world, as I said, it's just a string that I'm returning that page at the moment. It's not important. What's nice is you can see Chrome here has offered to translate this page for us, and that's because Next.js will kind of update the HTML props to signify that this page is actually German, and that's important for SEO and things like that, which is kind of critical when working with localization. Okay, so how do I know that I'm actually looking at a German page? So that's interesting, and as I said in the introduction, the locales are actually kind of provided to us throughout Next.js's pre-existing APIs, whether that's NextLink, their router, or their data fetching APIs. So we're actually going to just look at using the Next router right now. We're just going to import use router, which is the hooks way of doing things with router. Excellent. Now what you'll see is, if we actually kind of just look back in the documentation here, is, yeah, so this section here, accessing the locale information. You can access the locale information via the Next.js router. So we can use the use router hook, which we've just imported, and we'll have these props available to us inside of that hook. And from that, we'll be able to tell what page or what subpage we're on, i.e. is it English or is it German, or whatever locale you've added. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to log out our locale here, or log out our router here. Okay, so what we're doing is we're just going to stringify that router object, and we should have a bunch of key values inside of there for us to look at. Yeah, so we're on the DE page here. We have everything that was previously available with the Next router, path name, route, any query params, so on. But we're interested in these keys down here. So the current locale that we're on, the available locales on our default locale that we specified in Next.js config. So we've gotten all of that just by adding that IETN key to the Next config file, which is really powerful. And just to prove that this is indeed working, we'll go back to our root path, which, because we specified EN as the default, this will show EN as the current locale. Yep, you can see there, EN is available to us. Nice. So one of the other powerful ideas with Next.js is their awesome data fetching APIs, GetStaticProps and GetStaticPaths. And they already support locales, and those locale keys are available to us inside of these functions. So what we want to do is we want to now introduce GraphCMS at this point. We want to actually go off to GraphCMS and query for some localized content that we've added previously. So we're on an index page, and this page is going to list out all of the available products to us. We have 3 products in our GraphCMS project. We want to go off and query them and render them. So we've got like a nice list of products that people can view and access. So we're going to do that with the GetStaticProps API as an asynchronous function. And we're going to just import our previously instantiated GraphCMS client. Where is it? Not sure why I'm not getting the... Oh well, I'll have to import that manually, which is frustrating. Okay, so we've got our GraphCMS client here. What we can do is we will use the request method on there. Import GraphQL tag, and we're going to write a query here. So we just want all products available. We want the name, the slug, maybe the price too. So we're awaiting that call, and obviously these props run at build time. So these will this will essentially get data at build time and then build this page statically rather than running it on the client. So we're inside of Node at the moment. And what we need to return from this function is a props key. Props will be products. Excellent. So what that means is now that I've returned the products key inside of props, we can then use products inside of here. We'll just switch out router there so that we're logging out products. Now it's worth noting here that we didn't specify a locale. So as I said before, if we don't specify a locale, what will happen is that we'll fall back to the GraphCMS default, which is EN. So what we're expecting is a query to run to fetch our English products, and we should have 3 of them available to us. Excellent. One thing I might actually add as well is the locale field, just so we know that we're getting the English products back. Although as we can see, they are English, and you can see their locale. Excellent. So now if I go to my DE page, right, we should have the German products. No, we still have the English products, and that's because we haven't updated our query to actually use the active locale or the current locale that we're on. And we can do this because that active locale or that current locale is provided to us as a parameter inside of GetStaticProps. So we can destructure a locale. And then we need to now use that inside of our GraphCMS query. So we're going to go ahead and just update this. And we're going to say we want to define a locale variable, and it's of type locale. And we're going to use that here by locales. Again, it expects an array, but we only have one value, so just passing in one key. That's our locale, like so. Now we need to, of course, actually pass the locale prop from GetStaticProps to our query. And the request method expects a second argument, and it's a variables or an object of variables. So I'm just going to pass locale in here. So we've updated our GetStaticProps locale to actually go off and fetch our localized English products. Let's see if that has worked. Okay, so we're on the DE subpath and we have our DE products. If I go to the root where will be English, we have our English products. Fantastic. So it's worth noting as well that these pages are statically built. Although we are running Next.dev right now, because we're in development environment, those pages are a little slower than they would normally be because those GetStaticProps will rerun at every page refresh. So it's not actually building statically at the moment, but it will be in production. Excellent. So we have now a localized list of products available to us on our index page, but we actually need individual product pages to be built for each product in each localization. Now we can use GetStaticPaths to do this, and GetStaticPaths works with dynamic segments, and it works expecting to return an array of paths essentially that we want Next.js to build for us. So we're going to use a dynamic segment here. We're just going to use an ID key, And that square brackets around ID is actually the dynamic segment, and that's what Next.js looks for in the file system to denote that this is a dynamically generated path. So we'll just quickly build a functioning page here. And we need to use function GetStaticPaths. And of course, with GetStaticPaths, you also need to use GetStaticProps. They go hand in hand. Paths will essentially pass an array of paths to GetStaticProps, and from that you then fetch the data you need to build that specific page. So if you think GetStaticPaths is actually fetching the data for the collection, the array of collections, and then GetStaticProps will go off and fetch the individual data for each entry in that array. So as with GetStaticProps, we actually can get the locales available to us from the GetStaticPaths function. It's available here. So we'll just destructure locales. And what we want to do is we actually just want to return these locales. So we're just going to do return and paths here. And as I said, it expects an array. So we can just return. Well, we can't do that actually because we need an ID dynamic segment. So we're just going to actually jump ahead a bit and just go ahead and get the data that we need from GraphCMS. So again, we're expecting an array of products. So what we want is we want an array of products, and at this point we're not particularly bothered about the localization in this query. We just want all of the products, whether it's English or German. We're only really interested in that dynamic segment here, an ID. Now with GraphCMS, localized entries do not have unique IDs. So your German and English version of an entry will share the same unique UUID. So it's not unique in that sense, and that's because the locales kind of live on the same document, and it's just a variation of that. So all we need to do right now is just go off and get products, and all we're interested in is that ID. And we're going to say, because paths expects an array, we're just going to map over products. And it needs a params key, which is an object, and we're going to pass product.id. What we also need to return inside of GetStaticPaths is the fallback key. This is to essentially say if there is a path that is hit inside of your project, inside of your application, and that path does not resolve to a statically built page, it will go off and build that kind of on the fly. We're not interested in that today. It is a very cool concept. You should check that out in the Next.js docs. But we're just going to kind of pass false there. So that means that if somebody goes to a product page that doesn't exist or hasn't been built statically, then we'll just kind of show a 404. Okay, so we're returning some paths here, an array of paths which will have params, an ID param, which is what matches this dynamic segment. If we didn't return this ID key, so if I change this key to slug, for example, it'll actually error because it's looking to make sure that GetStaticPaths actually returns that dynamic segment key. Okay, so now as I said, GetStaticPaths returns an array, and it works kind of in conjunction with GetStaticProps. So with GetStaticProps, we now need to essentially, we're mapping over that paths array and then fetching data for each individual record inside of that array. So for each ID here, we're going to fetch specific data for that page. So we need Again, we need to make a request to GraphCMS. Put in our client here. We need to write a query with that'll accept the variable, because we have our ID variable, which is passed from the GetStaticPaths params. And then, of course, use that ID here, like so. And the fields we want, ID name, slug. We're going to move on to description as well, which is markdown, and the price. We've even got an image there, which we might do for your time. We want the height, the URL width. Okay, so again, inside of the request method, we need to pass our variables that it expects, in this case ID, and that will be params.id. Now params is available in GetStaticProps here, so we'll destructure that. So like I said, GetStaticProps is essentially running for each entry of this paths array. So at that point we have access to this object inside of here. So we've got params there, and we want params, and we're going to pass params.id as our ID variable. And with GetStaticProps, we need to return props product. So now inside of our React page component, we'll be able to destructure product here. It's worth noting at this point that we haven't actually used locales at all inside of GetStaticPaths, and that's going to be interesting, because what you'll see is for each page that we've built, we're going to get the English version essentially, despite what the current locale is. So I'm just going to copy this ID here, and this page should exist. Actually, it doesn't exist, and that's again because of what I just said. We haven't generated those pages using the locales that are here. So essentially, we just have ID pages available at the root. ID cannot be attached to a page component, must be exported from the page. Yep, of course I need to actually export my React component. That should do it. Images not defined in product. Of course, it's images. Excellent. So what I'll just add is, just to emphasize the point here, I'll just make sure you request that locale key, so we can see that it's English. And again, I now don't have a German page for that product, despite us knowing that that localization exists. You know, I've got the mug here. We also know that that mug exists with the same ID. So I should essentially be able to do this. Or how do we actually add this? You know, how do we build this localized path? And that's what we're going to do now. So what we did is, what's available to us is the locale key inside of GetStaticPaths. And I'm just going to log this out just so you can see there whilst this runs. So you can see, logging that out there, we have an array of our locale keys. So how do we now build a paths array that also factors in the locales? We essentially need to return a paths array with 6 entries. At the moment we have 3 products. but we also have an additional locale, i.e. German, that we need. So 3 times 2 is 6. So we should be returning 6 pages. We're only actually building 3 right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of update how GetStaticPaths is going to work and what it's going to go off and do for us and build those localized pages. So I'm just going to define a empty array here. Our initial request here for the products will just kind of go off and get all of the products, because as I said, the ID does not differ between localizations. But what we need to be interested in is how do we tell these paths here, how do we pass a locale inside of these paths array for each individual page. So we'll just have a look here. Yeah, what was I checking again? Products.map. Okay, so you can't add it to the params object because params only really allows you to actually send the parameters that the dynamic segment is expecting, in this case ID. So we can't add an additional locale key there. What we can do is actually just add it outside of here. Now what that means is essentially we need to kind of loop over this array of locales and then pass it into here, or build paths so that it factors in that locale key. So what we'll do is we'll do use a for loop locale of locales. And in here, what we're going to do is we're going to reassign paths, and we're going to spread in any pre-existing paths, and then also spread in products. We're going to map over that. We're essentially just going to move this up here into there like so. Make sure we spread that in so we only return a single flat array. Products map, product, params, locale. So we're inside of this for loop and we're iterating over each locale and providing the active or the current locale key here. So we'll just remove that. So what we should be expecting now is if I log this out, we should see an array with 6 entries, 3 unique IDs, and of course 2 different locales, so there should be 6 in total. So just check the console. Oh, of course I need to actually hit that page. All right, so paths now. We have the signature we're expecting. We have our 6 entries, our 6 objects inside of our array. We have 3 unique IDs, but more importantly, we have that locale key that we can then use inside of GetStaticProps to actually fetch for that localized content. So you can see right now, this page is now building. The DE page is building. The DE path is building. However, it's still English. So we actually need to use this locale key inside of GetStaticProps. So what we can do is we can just destructure that from the function and then just add that as a variable inside of our query. So I'll do that here. Of course, $, that's of type locale, and then we say locales locale. Excellent. Let's get rid of this log. So now that we've actually destructured locale from our paths, so this key right here, we've destructured that there and passed that as a variable to our query. So we're actually going to go off and get the localized version of the content specific to our current locale in Next.js. So if I refresh here, There we go. We've got DE, and we have, yeah, we've got our DE product essentially. Excellent. So we've got our paths, we've got localized paths building. Now we want to be able to kind of navigate around and actually click on pages and switch locales, and that'll be interesting. And as I said, NextLink kind of automatically supports that. NextRouter also supports that, so they've added this kind of locale key or locale prop to these APIs that you can use to essentially transition around your app and actually keep make sure that you're hitting the correct localization paths for your users. So we'll go ahead, and what we'll do is we'll actually kind of ensure that the products on our index page actually link to the relevant paths, or the relevant localized product pages that we've just built. So I'm going to go ahead and add NextLink. And if you've not used NextLink before, it's similar to Gatsby Link, funnily enough. It's kind of a drop-in replacement for the A tag, but it brings some nice features, kind of like preloading pages. So if you've got a link tag on a page, Next.js will kind of lazy load or preload those pages in advance, so that when people click to them, we're kind of getting a really nice fast transition. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of quickly write some JSX to map over our products. Oh, need the of course you always need a key. Inside of this div we're going to use link. Have a h1, just use product, name. So let's look at how we could use link and how we actually know what the context of what locale we're in, and how we pass that to link. So next link here, it has a href prop, which is just the path of the page that we want to transition to. So in our case, that's just going to be the ID of the product. And this is the one that we're interested in, locale. Yeah, and previously, you know, we knew that we can get the locale or the current locale from use router. So we're just going to do that, essentially. So href here will be product ID. And locale will be router dot current. I think it's just router dot locale. Yeah. Default locale would be en all the time. Locale is the locale that we care about. So essentially, use router is just kind of providing that for us from the path here, I guess, which is super nice. You don't have to worry about transitioning or handling, you know, transitioning between pages. You don't have to worry about handling which active locale you're on. Another thing that they've added is actually nice is automatic locale detection based on kind of system language that's set or browser language that's set. Next will automatically transition to the relevant subpath if that exists in your app, which is really nice. Oh, of course, I need to add a I keep not now. I always get that. Don't know what the key I'm hitting. Yeah, with the NextLink, you need to kind of have this child A tag, and that's where you'd pass any kind of class names if you wanted to style your link. So you can see as we hover over there, because we're on the root path, there's no sub. Because we're on the root page, we're at English here, so there's no subpath in the link down the bottom there. If I click that, I'm just going to get the English version there. I'm going to go back, English version. So if I now go to /de, which is our localized root page, we should again have a list of 3 products in German. Now clicking these should take us to the relevant product page, but in German. Really cool. That's nice. Excellent. So what if I was on this German product page and I wanted to, for whatever reason, just switch to English? How do we do that? So what we could do is quickly add a some kind of navigation inside of our app function, app component here, which kind of wraps the whole Next.js application. It's going to wrap every page. So what we can essentially do is just add a link to each locale that will take us to that specific page, or even back to the root of the application. But again, we're just going to use exactly what we have just done there. So I'm going to import use router from next router. And I also want the link component. So yeah, this is very similar to what we've just done on the product page. Except what we're going to do is we're going to list out every locale available to us and provide us a link to that. So we'll do router.locales, which will give us an array of the keys of all the locales that we specified at the very start of this video in our next config. We'll map over that locale, and then what we're going to do is we're going to turn link href. We'll just go back to the root. So always go back to the root page of that locale, and the locale will be locale. Need to provide a key here. No, actually, what I'll do is I'll actually wrap this in an unordered list. Be semantically correct. Messing up my closing tags. Yeah, so we're just mapping over the locales array from use router, and for each of those we just want to add a link to our page that'll take us back to the root page for that locale. Okay. React children only expect to see a single React element. I think that's because I haven't actually put anything inside of link, of course. That'll do it. There we go. So we should have a couple of links now at the top of our page once this rebuilds. Unexpected corresponding closing tag for li. Have I missed something? Oh, no idea what happened there. Yeah, but you can see at the top of the page here we have our locales. So if I'm on the DE now, I can click DE and it'll take me back to the root of DE. And I can switch to EN, and then all that context, the context of switching locales is handled between the router and NextLink. So because I've clicked to the root of DE and we're at that DE subpath now, all of these links have updated so that we're going to the specific localized page for that product. Very cool indeed. This is all kind of available out of the box using pre-existing Next.js functionality, just by adding the locales or the IETN key to next config. We could take this a step further if we wanted to get really kind of smart, and for example, right now we're on a specific product page and I want to look at the German product for that, or the German version of that product. I then have to, there's an extra click there. I've got to then click back into that product. What if I could kind of just toggle between the two and it would navigate accordingly? So we could do that because on the router there is an as path property available. So I'm just going to log that out so you can see. We'll just put that here. Router.asPath, I believe it is. Yep. So that should essentially be the ID, which equates to the page that has been built. So we can use that. See, that's at the root now. Notice how the subpath is emitted. Again, that's kind of the internals of the router, and that allows us to use that as the href prop. So we can just do as path, so which means it's going to go to the localized, or if you're switching locales, it's going to go to the new locale version of the page that you're currently on, if that makes sense. So I'll just show you quickly. Of course, I need router.asPath. Yeah, so if I click EN now, we should essentially be on this exact same product page, but in English. You can just transition between the two nicely, like so. What's important to remember there is that's not, we're not just switching kind of locales there in some kind of context and then rendering, updating these strings according to some localization somewhere else. These are unique individual pages built inside of Next.js, which is very important for SEO. If you're offering an international service to customers, it's important to know that they are less likely to buy from you if you don't sell on their locale or their language. So just bear that in mind, and that's one of the strengths of this kind of static localization approach. So yeah, I mean, that's really kind of cool. That's what I wanted to just show off, is that it's really nicely paired to GraphCMS with the localization in their content API, with Next.js's routing and powerful data fetching APIs. So I just really wanted to kind of talk about that, show that off. I will be updating pushing the code for this to my GitHub, and there'll be a link, or there is a link in the video, so you can check that out. Yeah, really happy with how this turned out. Would love to do this again soon. If you've got any ideas for content or stuff you'd like me to talk about, just go ahead and drop me a message on Twitter. It's at Yonog, that's YNNOG. I should probably put this inside of the stream. But yeah, been a blast, and thanks for watching. See you next time.